got the microphones working. I'll hit this thing and we can go ahead and start.
I can start?
Yep, I think we're ready.
Good evening. This is the regular meeting of the Architectural Board of Review, Village of Lake Bluff, April 2nd, 2019. Roll call, please.
Member Callahan?
Here.
Member Dahlman?
Here.
Member Caraway?
Here.
Member Russ?
Here.
Chair Hunter?
Here.
And members Stegan and Waymire are absent.
Okay. Minutes of the February 5th meeting. We didn't have a March meeting, did we? February 5th meeting. Comments on those? They were pretty lengthy minutes. And I can't find them. Anybody?
I had no comments.
Come on.
I know, we need Carol to,
No comments, huh?
I was playing.
Anybody else?
yeah.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes of,
So moved.
a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to something that is not on tonight's agenda? I don't see a crowd, so I'm assuming that you folks are all here for something on the agenda. So, is any of this a public hearing?
Nope.
No, okay. So then the first thing is the consideration of a sign permit application for tenant sign criteria for 910 Sherwood Drive and 42 Sherwood Terrace. So somebody's here to speak to that? If you would.
To the podium.
Good evening, Board. Thank you for gathering tonight to hear this application. My name is Rob Scanina, representing 111 Associates. At the behest of Mr. Croak, it was requested that we put together a master signage policy for the campus. Campus is in the light industrial zone. It's a 23-key multi-unit light commercial flex. If you all have the application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in essence, have you all driven by it or looked at it?
Yep.
So the property is characterized by, each door is either set in off the facade of the building, or it's set behind a glass apron. And so this condition, while it breaks up the space visually for, people driving by and makes it a little more interesting to look at than a typical flat commercial building, tenants have complained for many years that it makes it difficult for small signage to be seen. So there's a variety of different applications on doors at this time. Mr. Crook asked me to formalize the existing conditions, propose a plan going forward that's, different than what you have particularly prescribed in the code, but still relatively consistent, and something that presents a policy that the tenants can, live with, that helps their presentation. So what I've done is break the application into two sections here. Section 1 is existing conditions and hardship. I just described essentially the doors are either set back or obscured by the alcove glass. What I'd like to propose for the first part of this application is essentially existing conditions can remain for 2 years, at which point they would be sunset subject to Section 2 if the existing condition is not in compliance with the proposal in Section 2. Tenants, any new tenant, of course, would have to comply with the proposed new signage policy, and Any tenant not in compliance with the new policy after 2 years could, of course, come to you directly, but the campus would be dictated by the master signage policy. So, any questions yet?
Keep going.
No? So, in your sign code, chapter 10, section 10 is what governs the industrial districts. This is in L1, the light industrial. Specifically, 1010 14D2 cites that door lettering shall not exceed 5 inches in height. It is interesting that your code specifically speaks to lettering, and section 2 talks about signs. It doesn't particularly limit a sign to 5 inches, just the lettering of the sign. In my section 2, what I'm proposing, and I could have, I should have maybe made a graph for you. But what I'm proposing is, if you look at the existing conditions on the property, to expand the 5-inch limit to 13 inches. So, and the 13-inch limit would be restricted to alphanumeric characters. So the name of the company, the number of the company, or some other characteristic, a slogan maybe. So 13 inches is enough for 2 to 3 courses of alphanumerics. Then I propose that there also be allowed a see-through additional 13 inches, so for a maximum of 26 inches of graphics. I contemplate like what exists today, which is the vinyl press-on that's typical of, commercial signage. And I also propose, so I'm not sure if you all can see this, but basically if the door is like this, half the door, so 13 inches would be for the alphanumerics, 13 inches by 30 would be for graphics or any combination. So, sure. So basically what I'm asking is that this be, and there are a couple of other things, that any new signs would be limited to non-opaque treatments, so that you could see, through. My understanding is that for a variety of reasons, security and just general inspection purposes, the opaque application on doors is frowned on. If you drive around the neighborhood to the other buildings in the area, people have all sorts of signs on their doors. Most of them are see-through, some of them are opaque. Most of them fit inside, my proposed 26 inches high by 30 wide. So, in essence, that's it. What I'm asking for is to have the existing conditions remain in place. The documentation is there now, so you see it's dated and you have it. The existing tenants have been operating under these conditions for some period of time. Within 2 years, if they are not in compliance with the proposal in section 2, they would either have to come into compliance with that or come to you and specifically apply for a variance.
Okay? That it?
That's it.
All right. Well, first of all, I commend you or Mike or whoever that started this, because I went by that building a couple of times, and it's a mess. Building's fine, but exactly your issues are easy to see, in my humble opinion. So with that said, Carol, you want to start off?
Sure, and Bob doesn't usually speak first, he just couldn't wait to give you a compliment, and I agree. I say, yay! I can't think of a time a building owner has been so mindful, so, that's point number one to make. And yay again, this is really a nice presentation, not just for the fact that you have been mindful of all of these issues. You've actually made a very complete visual presentation for us too. That's just a great reference. I actually, had it with me while I was looking to try and see what you had here, because I always like to see what a petitioner brings to us, to see what your point of view is. Sometimes we don't understand it if we don't think what your point of view might be, but I'm yay and yay on this. So I think it's pretty easy for me to work through this. I think you have some great ideas. The size that you're proposing is, I think it's great. I mean, I think it works with your property. I agree 100% with Bob that taking this in hand is a very good idea. And I have all kinds of check marks and notes. I wouldn't so much describe this as being a hardship situation as the fact that you do have special, unique circumstances. And the notion that you would create a way to do signage for your building, I think, is just delightful. We did get a comment in our packet about the 2 years. I think I would say that tenants can leave their existing signage in place for up to 2 years if it is currently conforming to the village ordinance. But if it's not, it should have come down before now, and they should go directly to your proposal, I think. I don't think we should say that anything can stay in place for 2 years. We're not really giving permission to anybody non-conforming. So I think that's the one thing that I think could be crisped up a bit, rather than having tenants leave their signage in place for 2 years, which would be much longer than I think anybody would propose, but, y'all can have at it. I would say if it's conforming to the current ordinance, then
The 5
sunset-
inches?
Yeah, if it conforms to the current ordinance, then the sunset provision,
Well, then there's no need for a sunset provision.
that's what I mean.
Every
So-
one of those is slightly different, so some conform, most don't.
So that's what I'm saying about the 2 years. Maybe someone else can phrase that better if I'm not making it clear. I mean, they should go to your program if we're approving your program. They should go to your program as soon as possible, because some of them pretty much have, paper taped up in some cases, so,
I think maybe one,
yeah.
but some of them are,
And there are
Some of them are
opaque
actually-
pieces that are applied to the door, and, I don't think we're talking about anything onerous. No one has to replace a door here. You're not asking for an extreme solution, so I think that's pretty good. I don't want to take everybody's time here. I just want to flip through now.
so are you saying you want every one of these tenants to come before the board with their current sign and apply?
If they're non-conforming, they can apply for a variance, but if they don't want to apply, they should conform to your new program, assuming we agree to the new program. I don't think giving them permission to have 2 more years makes sense. We've had sunset provisions with various people, and maybe everybody can chime in on the 2
Yeah.
years, and, you and I should not spend very much more time on it. Maybe everybody else can jump in on this, but I think you've got some great ideas. I think it will help to improve the building. I
Well,
think you've-
what I've asked, though, is for 13 inches for alphanumerics and 13 inches for additional graphics.
Great. I'm thinking what you have proposed is pretty good, except for that 2-year thing.
Okay, so you're saying you agree with section 2, but you want all the folks that have something now to come in and say, we will, section 2 covers what we have today, so we want to be okay with that?
What is section 2 then?
Before we
Section
get
2,
into
the signage.
into the details of that, let's keep going on this and then come back to the time frame and how we want to deal with that.
Yes, so I think the 13 plus 13
But as far as the
works just
format
fine.
of what's been presented, you're okay with that?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
sometimes we have lots of confusion about what a landlord's signage is for the building and then what the tenant's signage is for their space, and I think you're being very clear about it. I think it's a good proposal.
Matt?
I agree. I like your proposal. I think it's a fair kind of sign dimensions that you're giving your tenants. And if we're talking about the time frame for sunsetting and all that, we can come back to that. That was my only comment too. is the, you know, what's the 2-year represent? But we can come back to that as our overall theme.
You're up, Neil.
As I read this, the first thought I came up with was when it said at the top of the part you wrote, Mike, where you said the sign code doesn't allow window signage in the L1 zoning district. And then as I drive through it, more and more of the tenants in there are not light industrial, which was what the original zoning was.
Right.
You find a lot of office space, got retail space, got automobile dealers. And I wonder if it isn't time to rewrite the zoning for the whole area, including with the signage code. So that's the first thought I came up with. As far as the 2 years is concerned, I suspect, how long would you guess that the signage has been like this? Has it been a number of years?
Yeah, I mean, some of the people, yeah, I mean, some people have been there for, you know, Oh My Goodness Cookies has been there since, I mean, it's at least 10 years.
Yeah, so-
So they move in, they put their signs up, and they stay there.
Yeah, and then somebody else moves in and they put a sign up and
Right.
there was no coordination with it. And I guess my thought was if it took another 1 or 2, I'd like to see it done faster, but if it took another 1 or 2 years, that didn't bother me. Because it's probably been a whole bunch of years, and it hasn't bothered me yet, until now. In the proposal, the new signage policy, I commend you for coming up with this. I think it's very well thought through. One thought that I wondered about is where you've got two 30 by 13 inch rectangles. What about just making it one 30 by 26 rectangle and let them do whatever they want within that rectangle in the top half? So that would be a,
Right. Well, the reason I mean, that was in deference to your 5-inch in section 2.2, where you specifically cite 5 inches for alphanumerics. So, I mean, yeah,
yeah, I'm not concerned.
what I've written contemplates that to some extent. And some of the tenants do have almost, you know, they've incorporated alphanumerics into a larger, like, you know, globe graphic.
Yeah, if it was 30 by 26 and not divided into two halves, that wouldn't bother me.
Uh-huh.
You may not like it, you may have reasons for wanting to do it this way, so. What was the other one? Your comment in
I
section
spoke
6.
to Mr. Croak, you know, there were a couple of ideas that didn't make it to the proposal. One of them was coverage ratios of the area. You know, I had an idea that, you know, a certain percentage of the pane could be covered, and the idea was to, we limited that and just said, let's go with the dimensions that way.
I mean, when you do a percentage, it can get hard to figure out what a
Yeah,
percentage of what.
and the idea was to just limit the four corners of the sign to something consistent and not, because people can be infinitely creative. I mean, you can get like a slinky, you know, and people can calculate the area of the slinky, and, you know, then you're gonna have like something that looks definitely out of this world.
Two more things. In item number 6, it talks about subtlety in the course of identifying the business, and all colors should be muted and natural and sound boring. I wouldn't mind it if people are opened up to, within, you know, to do what they wish to do.
Uh-huh.
I don't find it an exciting building, and maybe some things there could be done there that would help it. The last area that I've got is on the building itself. There are a couple of places where there's building identity that says, for instance,
It's missing an H.
10 Sherwood Drive.
Yeah, it's missing an H.
But on
That's spring work.
Sherwood, one of the letters is
Yeah,
missing.
we have the letters. That's spring maintenance. We have to, that
But it
came off.
seems in addition to getting the tenants to,
Sure, that's on the,
these should be straightened out also.
yeah, that's on the list.
So that's it for me.
Okay. Like Carol and Matt said, you did a great job, I think, on the policy that you wrote. And yeah, the only thing, I mean, I think the proportions are good with as far as the signage area. And, the only thing I would have a question about is the 2-year grace period, I guess.
Sorry?
The 2-year grace period to change the signs.
Okay, my turn.
Oh, yeah.
Other than what I said when I opened, what I like about this, a couple of things I like about it. One, I'm not really concerned, I kind of agree with Neil about some of the stuff that we do starts to tend towards boredom. Maybe it's time to get a little juice into this. But what I also like about it is the fact that there's a boundary that you've set up. And whatever happens within that boundary, I'd like to say, is none of our business anymore. So we don't have to worry about the message, we don't have to worry about the graphic, we don't have to worry about anything as long as it fits within that boundary, which selfishly means that we don't have to look at every sign that somebody comes up with. It's a nuisance for us, it's a nuisance for you, and it's a nuisance for a new tenant. So, we've tried to do that to sort of create boundaries on certain buildings that made everybody's life a lot simpler. So that's one thing. I would disagree with the 2-year process. Driving around, it looked to me like most of those signs were just the die-cut letters, and, well, yeah, that's not free. It doesn't take 2 years to recoup to do that again. So I'm going to be generous and say let's give it a year. That's kind of my point on that. As far as the identification, I'm not quite sure how you would do this, but every one of those spaces has got a number, 1 through whatever it is, 25. And those are not really signified on the building itself. And I would suggest, if you can do it in an economical way, to do a permanent outside number on the masonry, above that opening or next to that opening, that's just simple number. It would, probably be metallic or something that is easily seen, because right now, if I'm looking for slot 23, it's a chore. Sometime you can't see it, and then you have to look at the 1, 2, or 3 up from that and sort of count the openings as you go along. So that would be my suggestion. Otherwise, I think it's a great notion, and we should kind of take this idea further. If, like Neil says, it may be time to start looking at everything else out there.
Well, another thought, if you do what you said, where it's got you've got the 910 Sherwood Drive sign, if you do what Bob just suggested and make the numbers in the same color and the same font and the same size, and put them beside each of the doors.
That's what I'm
I think
saying.
make it a
Then
whole
you
much
could see
easier.
it, and that's on your dime, not on your tenant's dime. But it's really not that big a deal to do. Yeah, that would be an easy way to at least find what you're looking for, as long as you have the number. So that's my suggestion. Any other comments that, the timeframe,
Yeah, my only question would be, why the 2-year grace period? Is that a financial decision? Is that just so you don't frustrate tenants?
Tenants roll off. Some of these folks, have, some of the signs are quite nice. They have told me they spent, hundreds of dollars on it. Some of them are very thoughtfully done, like, Soleil Toujours is got the tree element, and, they put some work into the design of it. Conceptually, tenants come and go, and with it, I figured within a 2-year space that it gives certain opportunities for attrition.
Natural attrition
And-
instead of
and,
being a,
um, it's a proposition, okay? It's a proposition. I understand where you're at, and, so what I am not clear on, it seems like, so you're okay with the 4 corners defined, and you're even okay with just generally having it stay within that box and not limited to the alphanumeric and the graphics, just 26 by 30?
I think so. I am.
yeah, and I don't know, maybe we just do 30 by 30, I don't know if 20, I know you kind of based it on some, maybe we just do 30 by 30, and I don't know if that's asking, but I don't know where 26, I mean, it seems a little arbitrary if we just give them a box. I mean, sometimes maybe if it's a circular symbol, having a square is an easier thing to deal with.
It doesn't mean you have to fill it up.
No,
but
but
that's
it's,
your
but
max.
but it would allow them to, if they have something, it's just a thought, I'm not sure.
I think 30 is great. I think you actually interrupt the current door numbers. I think there's a reason that the maximum,
And that's, yeah,
all within 26 inches.
then that's great. If there's a rationale for it, then I'm all for that.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
that's-
between the door handle, the push bar, and the sign,
Okay,
Probably right. Yeah.
then, okay, perfect. Then
if
that,
that's 30.
that sounds great. You thought about it more than I have, so
It puts
that's,
it in the top half of the door.
that's
It would
great.
be right over the number.
and I do
If he puts a
like
new
that
number up,
number thing,
it's a big
of
deal.
course, that's a nice, it could actually be a decorative, add something. You could do it really nicely, those numbers, permanently on the.
It's honestly, it's not the greatest. It was something that they put up. There were a couple buildings, it seems like, that were done by the same developer at the same time.
Yeah.
Across the street, he's got the same
Yeah.
font, thing installed on his masonry. I can work with Michael, we'll take a look at some alternatives to
Yeah.
just
All
changing.
you need is something that big,
Yeah.
just like what's on the glass, but outside on the brick, so it's always in the same place
Yeah.
for every one of those spaces.
Yeah, there's great website called Modern House Numbers. You get standoffs that go in the brick, and it sits nicely. It could be a nice feature for the building. I think that's a great idea.
So what are we recommending here, people?
26 by 30-inch sign band. I don't know that we're deciding about building numbering, but it sounds like a great idea. Maybe you want to explore it
I
and see what
can
you want to do.
Look at it, yeah.
And then there's the question of the sunset, and I think we have a note, in addition to the concern about 2 years, a note that says, it sounds like we're giving a variance if we, grant that people are allowed to keep it for a period of time, which is why I suggested, the sunset if it's conforming. If it's not conforming already to the village ordinance, it's, it should have changed last year, not next year, so I didn't think it was onerous. Maybe people will drag their feet, and maybe it'll be forgiving, and maybe Mike will happen to not notice that people haven't changed it out quickly, but I think the suggestion here is that we don't give a blanket variance of 2 years to anybody, because we're not really intending to do that. So maybe it's just a little bit of silly wordsmithing, but we're really talking about how soon to start enforcing something, and we should be enforcing our ordinances, period. Not that we like to lean on people, but I just thought that was a way around that. So a 1-year sunset is fine. I don't have a strong feeling one way or another. I was just trying to problem solve a little bit with that.
So you said 1 year?
Yep.
If people are in agreement, I'd like to see that language addressed. And, I also agree that, we don't need to talk about color and font and things like that. The 26 by 30-inch sign band sounds like a dream come true. People can figure it out, and people do spend hundreds of dollars, just on design, laying out a design and then go back and do it again. People do spend a lot of money on what looks like a simple vinyl die-cut sign. People really do incur some expense, so we're not trying to be difficult. I think we just are fine with 26 by 30 inch. I'm just guessing when your sunset is gonna work. Numbering the units, I think, is more in your ballpark. You can always come back and ask again, or we can defer that to a next conversation 3 months down the road. You may wanna roll out this program and see how it works and come back and chat. So that's what's on the table, 26 by 30, 1 year, and do we have anything else we need to
And they can
discuss?
do pretty well what they want
Yep.
within that 26 by 30, including letters that are bigger than 5 inches.
They could
If
have
they
a
wish.
big
They
S.
want.
Doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And they can do zingy colors for you, Neil.
My concern with the 2 years that we'll just lose track of it and nothing, you know, and it won't be on our radar in 2 years. And
Yeah.
who's gonna enforce that? A year feels a little bit more, I'm with you, like, they should abide by the law now, but if, that may be just a little onerous, so maybe that 12-month period is a fair enough grace period that stays on our radar, it gets people thinking about it. If you give them 2 years, they'll never do it because it's 2 years. They're just gonna say, I'll do it in 18 months, and it never happens, and nothing's gonna happen. So maybe a year gives them that right window to think about it, save up for it if they have to, start producing it, and get it done.
Neil? Well, everybody shaking their heads, so let somebody make a motion on all that then.
So I move to approve the signage band of 30 by 26 with no restrictions on content or color, but with a grace period of 1 year.
And that's a recommendation.
Yeah, after approval of this, you know, whenever it's final approved.
I have one other, this is that goes on the door. Now, some of those units,
Or the alcove glass.
okay, or the alcove glass, that was my point, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is that clear to what we're saying?
Right, so
So
people have
if people are inside the 26 by 30 at this time, that's fine.
They're golden.
If they're outside that, you'll let it stay for a year, but then
Then they gotta get inside that, so.
Okay. anything?
Anything that they want, yeah, we're not gonna try and regulate what they say. We can't, actually, that's a new
Yeah.
Supreme Court law.
But you as a landlord can, that's separate from us.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is allowing the 26 by 30 signs on the alcove glass for tenants who have it and on the door. But it's not, once the 1 year's up, then they can't have signs on the other windows other than the alcove glass or the door.
So it's one sign per tenant.
Well, the tenants who have alcove glass in front of the door, his criteria allows them to have a sign on each.
Oh, I need.
You can only really see one at a
Yeah.
time, because if you're outside, you're looking at
Sure,
the
that
alcove
makes
glass.
sense.
If you're inside, you're looking at the door.
Yeah.
You know, in the alcove,
Sure.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so did you make that motion?
I
Somebody
made
did.
half of that motion. Seemed like there's additions to the motion.
Do we need to have some final language approved here, or how are we gonna do this? I mean, this is a great presentation, but there's a lot more verbiage here than you probably need, so.
Yeah, I think our motion's good. It's basically to approve what he's requesting with the amendments to make it 30 inches by 26 inches and change the grace period to 1 year. We can maybe
I
do a
could-
condensed version for the village board, since it's a recommendation going to the village board that reflects that and doesn't, have as much explanation, but has memorializes it for the future.
And will you
That's what
consent
it
to
is.
amend your motion to specifically allow alcove glass and door glass?
What she said. Yes,
Did we forget anything else?
and that's an and/or, right? So they can have both?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, is that a motion now? So we need a second on that motion?
I second it.
All right, roll call.
Okay. Member Russ?
Aye.
Member Kerouac?
Aye.
Member Callahan?
Aye.
Member Dahlman?
Aye.
And Chair Hunter?
Aye.
Okay. The recommendation passes, and we'll pass it on to the village board for final approval.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for the presentation, all your hard work.
Okay. Next is consideration of sign permit application for Wine Brokers of Illinois at 910 Sherwood Drive, Unit 20. So for the audience, state your name and,
Hi, I'm Mark Miara, and this is my wife Monica.
Hello.
okay,
We're the owners of Wine Brokers, and Robert is our tenant. And we,
landlord.
Landlord.
okay, sorry, Robert. Been a long day. Yeah, we have window wraps on our sign now just to diversify, because a lot of my clients, when we were approved for a retail boutique wine shop and liquor store, a lot of people, customers had a problem finding our location. And we had these window wraps installed. It's 48 inches wide by 96 inches tall. It just has a picture of a vineyard with a bottle, and the other picture is a bottle of champagne with a waterfall in the ocean. Just from those window wraps, we had a lot more clients coming in because they knew where our location was. And then I was made aware from Mr. Croak that it's against the regulations, and we're just hoping that we can keep those window wraps up. They get changed every 12 months during the summer months, so it's always a change, very colorful, very nice looking, and it actually, you know,
Helps.
makes the location pop.
Okay. Tim, I'm gonna start at the other end this time. Obviously, you heard
wow.
the previous discussion, so.
Yes.
Yes.
What is our stance on window
It's not
signage?
loud.
Yeah.
Not allowed?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that obviously it does allow people to find your place. That's
And
one
it
of the
does help a
things.
lot with sales. Like I said, it's a wrap. It's the new modern technology for advertising. All the vehicles have it. The businesses are doing, if you look at all the big cities, all the liquor stores, wine shops have all their windows wrapped.
So this is applied to the glass?
It's
Yes.
a vinyl.
Right,
It
okay, I
has,
know
you
what
can
you're talking.
reflect sun through it. It just, you know, advertises product, advertises where Wine Brokers is.
Okay.
This goes back to the discussion of, is this a light industrial district? or
Exactly,
is it a
and this is
retail
what,
district?
this is what I wanted to mention, that since we moved in, it's been already 3 years that we are at that location. We have seen actually lots of changes, just as Rob notices, that there is not really light industrial zoning. I mean, it is, but there's so many different tenants right now that many of them have, like us, it's retail, there is a personal training where actually right now 2 spaces there, plus what is antique resale shop and then a dentist. So we see a huge change in the neighborhood. So I like the idea of rewriting the I would say rezoning, the zoning regulations. I think that would apply to this location.
Plus
What-
another-
Go ahead, no, please.
Plus, I noticed also with Pasquesi, the flower shop, they have 4 window wraps in their windows. And there's no issue with that. They have 4, we have only 2.
We've recently asked them to apply for a permit also. They
Okay.
may
Okay.
be here next month for
Fair enough.
that. Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask, I know we're, but if this was rezoned, right? Let's just say we did get all this rezoned and this issue isn't a light industrial issue and it's a commercial, what are our regulations then on this? Would this still be allowed if we did rezone it to commercial?
Well,
No.
you know, one thing that sticks in my mind is for the target outlots, we said 15% of the windows can be covered with window signs in the tenant sign criteria for that.
What we did, because we had this issue way back when with Bluffingtons.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, and, you know, because they wanted to have that sign, and it couldn't be a window sign, so what we kind of collectively came up with was what they have. It's a hanging sign behind the glass.
Well, and what we did was say that this can qualify as art, but to be specific about it, we made sure that we did a variance to allow specifically that. So we
Yeah.
did not say it's okay to do what Pasquesi does, though, you know, next month is another story.
Right.
But are you familiar with Bluffington's?
Yes, we eat breakfast there. We are a small business, so we like to support
Yeah,
local
no,
small
right.
businesses.
Yeah, so there's something that looks like a
Yes.
sign and it's framed out and it's, you know, it's only 6-7 inches back from the
Right.
glass.
It is 15% for the central business district, so I think that's where we got the target outlet sign criteria that said 15% window
Of
coverage.
total, like, if I have a total of 100 square feet broken into 5 different windows, I can put one big one sign and one big
Yeah, right.
one big sign in a window.
I think so.
It's not 15% per
Right.
opening.
Right.
Well, CBD, actually, it does say per window here. I don't have the target
But you know,
ones
the
in front of me, so,
the CBD is a different ballgame.
Yeah, I'm trying to get,
I'm like intrigued with Neil's notion and with what you folks just came, and this just might, you know, turn upside down a little bit of what we just talked about with the previous, with the owner here.
right.
Is the idea that, yeah, the park is changing. We spent how many months, a couple of years ago, talking about what to do to make it more
Right.
retail friendly, business friendly. They're not building widgets back there anymore.
right.
And, you know, you can almost envision something really lively going on back there, if everybody would do it.
Right.
I agree with you, but you know, to place all of the burden on signage is also not appropriate. So in the case of Bluffington's, yeah, we sort of wiggled through and said, well, we'll think of this as art, but we'll give it the variance because of its specific nature. It doesn't mean they could put another sign up. For instance, not long after that, we got the martial arts people come in, who are absolutely lovely people, win prizes in the parade every year. I mean, we love them, but what they wanted to do was take their menu, basically, their list of activities, just make it really big and cover the whole window with it, which, you know, it's a billboard. So, actually, you know, these are kind of like full-size posters too. Just today, I was talking to a guy, it's a little off the subject, they know I digress. So he was talking about this blue bush that he makes, which is rebar, you know, so think that, you know, yummy orange color, and on that he puts blue sky vodka bottles, and he calls it his blue bush. So, you know, it's a piece of art. So, yes, I can understand why this identification is important to you. I see the yummy colors. You can easily tell people, this is who I am, this is where I am, you can't miss me. And, you know, a number 12 or whatever number you are, you know, a little 1-2 on the building isn't gonna do what this big stuff would do for you, but it's also not just about signage. You have other ways, including, you know, what Bluffington's did, or doing something inside that's lit up, that's like a display, you know.
So it could be something, are you suggesting we could do something inside, in front of the window, but then you would also have to ask for a variance, right? Because it also would be considered as a sign in the window.
If you had a blue bush with the light coming up underneath it, and I could drive by and I could see my blue bottles and my green bottles and my pink bottles and my clear glass bottles, it would, you know, it'd still be obvious who you are. But, you know, I'm just trying to give it as an example, because the
another-
example that we
yes.
have here is like a billboard, and that's something we're not trying to tell people is not highly desirable. You know, we're trying to tell people, if we let you do it, we'll have to let somebody else do it. So, you know, this is basically like a big poster, you know, one of these is actually proprietary. You know, it's
We
a
have-
particular,
We have, I mean, we
Yeah, it's
have
particular
copyrights
brand.
and everything. It's not like we, you know, just put that picture out there without permission from the producer.
but yeah, one of these is actually a proprietary brand. I
Yes.
mean, it's actually an advertising billboard is what it is, and it's bigger than we would allow for any kind of signage. So, you know, there are ways that we can think about things that are more flexible, but I'm not sure that this is the most excellent example for us to say, oh, yeah, that's okay, that's a perfect variance. It's not looking like a perfect variance to me, is what I'm saying. It's not your only option to have this full window sign.
This is a film that if you're inside, you can see out.
Yes.
You can see through
You
it,
have
right?
the little holes, you get the sunlight
Yeah,
through there.
right.
And another good thing about this for security, you know, you can't see in, but you do see the colors and all this stuff, but it curbs theft. Nobody will break in. No one even knows it's a liquor store or a wine shop. But just from that, I've heard from other retailers, it's curbed someone smashing the window in, jumping in, grabbing
Right.
bottles and leaving. Not saying that's gonna happen in Lake Bluff, but you never know sometimes. So I just, going off of the modern advertising, that's where we got the ideas, because in my previous building, I had a tenant who did all the wraps. And I just got the idea, like when we moved into Rob's building, it's like, it was a great idea. Like I
Plus
said,
the-
we've
plus-
had it there for 3 years. Well, they change yearly. And in August, I was supposed to change them again and do something different.
A different product and different scene.
How many windows do you have on your,
3.
There's 3 windows in the door. We just have the wrap on 2 windows.
Mike, if I could ask you a question.
Sure.
On the Target building,
Mm-hmm.
there's the extremely long wall that is parallel to 176,
Right.
and it has
Display cases on
a
it,
couple of display cases.
right.
I don't know what's in the display cases. Are those
Nothing,
wraps
they
that are on the windows?
They're not really display
Yeah.
cases.
it's more just like a
They
graphic?
look like a display case.
That was
Yeah,
the
right.
intent,
Yeah.
and we thought they would be, but they can't be, so.
Yeah, they're just like a graphic to break
Yeah.
out the massing.
I'm going to throw out something that's just based on our previous conversation, that you've got a year to think of something else. And we've got a year to think of something else for that whole area.
Oh.
That we put that on our agenda of how to start to relook at the L1, L2 areas. Well, I guess it's all L2 out there, isn't it?
All L1.
Or
almost-
L1,
almost all
okay,
L1,
whatever it is.
yeah. Mhm.
So I'm saying that leave them up, think about another way to do it in case the decision falls the other way. Whether it's taking pieces of plexiglass and hanging them up and hanging them back behind the glass a little bit, like much, or something else. And we will be able to pursue other thoughts for the entire industrial park. It shouldn't even be called an industrial park anymore.
Business park.
Now it's becoming more
Yeah,
retail now.
business park, I mean,
Now, I do have a question, like some of like the Ferrari dealer, they have black tint. It's not as colorful as mine, it's just black. Is that considered signage?
No, it's not.
Just because it's black, but it's the same material as we have on our windows? I noticed it, that's why I'm bringing it up.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's not considered signage when it's just black.
where do they have black tint?
I'm not sure which windows.
The Ferrari dealer has tint, the pediatrics place across the street has silver tint. I guess maybe that's for sunlight, but it's still something blocking the windows,
Right.
like.
Yeah, it's
what we
not a
have.
matter of blight, it's a matter of just information. Like, we don't want to be one of those like Chicago downtowns where we just have things everywhere. We're trying to maintain a little sense of integrity, of the building by not allowing people just to go about. So it's not a matter of covering a window, I think it's a matter of, everybody had, this concept, right? And everything, it's a different
It's a matter of
building,
content, you
right?
say.
It's just kind of a tasting.
Right.
So,
That looks like a
It's
piece
not
of
an
white paper
invalid
they put
point,
over
but
it.
there's
Don't know what
a
that is.
spirit to this that we're trying
Same
to
building.
maintain.
But there's really nothing negative to things on my window,
It's not negative, it's simply you're advertising something and your advertising is not allowed right now.
no,
That's-
this is something we have to talk about because I'm in that business. And if I can't push my business on the North Shore, I might have to go look elsewhere, which makes, I establish myself in Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, I want to stay here.
Well, that's why I say I think we need to rethink that
right.
whole
I mean,
park.
that's- it's
because
not- right.
You're absolutely right on one hand, if we're trying to make a retail place out there and say, but we can't tell anybody what you're doing.
Right,
Right.
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's
Well, another one that you raised, you talked about the tint or the black that's
Yes.
on some windows. This is a window that's on the same building, that on the side light here, they've got a cardboard box sitting beside it, it looks like. But that's the view from the outside. The window to the door looks like it's got a piece of white paper on it. And then this other window has something white that's on the bottom 2/3 of it and something dark on the top. I don't know what it is.
Right.
But, I mean, that's just another example of what you're
Right.
talking about, where something is covering the window.
Yeah, I mean, if you would go by our place, I put a stack of wine against the window, and you're gonna see that from the street, it's not gonna look good. This is why we have stuff like this, because right behind that, we have beautiful wine shelves, and it's displayed in front of the window in the shop. And it just, from, when you look out, you see the beautiful, the sunlight coming in, you have the pictures, and you have a wine display.
Yes, because
And-
another note is most of these businesses, most of them, I mean, not all of them, but right now have, all they have is that aluminum blinds, which most of the times they are closed. So that's why the building used to look more uniform. But if we would remove those blinds and then, like, you're going to leave like a, actually you will have a view to the shop. And that's where we're going to have a back of the shelves in front of the windows, so it's not gonna look pretty either. So that's,
For sure, I mean,
Another-
that's gonna be our struggle.
right.
Hopefully in a year, we'll have an amazing resolution.
I'd like to think so, if we think
But
about it.
you bring great points, right, to the point, but it is, we can't, it's simply not allowed, so it's not a matter of just saying, this is great. We just spent 20 minutes saying 26 by 30
Right.
is like, oh my gosh, that's
But
amazing.
that's what, we also said we've got a year to,
That's what I'm saying,
to
so
make
we,
things
right, so we can't just
change.
jump to this and say, this is okay, because we just did the other one, so we need to just regather.
Yeah.
I'm with you, I think that's a great point.
You remember the Hubscap store on 176? I think we had this conversation maybe a decade ago, that under our ordinance, all of the hubcaps in that window along 176 would be considered advertising.
I forgot about that.
And, it was a dandy display. It made me smile every time I drove by it, all the different wheel covers.
Yeah, back when you had hubcaps.
Yep, back when there was such a thing. So, yeah, if you have some ideas on this, that would be great. But I feel like I'm dodging the issue. I'm with Bob saying, might take a year to think this through. I don't know where to go. I don't feel like we have a clear direction. Does anybody?
No, you know what, and I don't know if the village would be willing to cough up a few bucks if we could get maybe some sort of a consultant in here that said, what should we do? Advertising people, good grief, we got some
Yeah.
great advertising people in this town. What could we do to make this an attractive place
Mhm.
in general?
Okay. Yeah, I think we could do that.
And that would mean that we don't have to do anything right now.
Okay,
Okay.
so we'll just follow.
Very good.
Yeah, so,
But think about
Within a
it,
year, we would just follow
again,
whatever's happening.
think
here.
about a possible alternative. What I do hear you saying is, where this is, if you've got a whole bunch of wine racks back there, that's pretty inviting.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a security concern.
Yeah.
And we only have to look at other retailers to see what kind of issues there are. We all love to pick on Lake Forest, Walgreens downtown, what a big corner. I think it's all back painted glass now.
Yeah,
You can see through the entry door, but,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
beautiful building has all opaque glass. So it doesn't have signage advertising in it, but it also doesn't have visibility. So I don't know, is that an appropriate workaround, that if it's one solid color, like
Right.
a black
Well, that
glass
doesn't-
or
that
And
doesn't-
look
mirrored
any
glass?
better, I know, that's raising the question, would that look any better if we would just put like a black or blue or green
that doesn't
color?
get
I
the point
mean,
across of what you're doing.
Right.
right,
So the mirrored look would improve your security. It wouldn't necessarily be what your building owner wants to see, and it wouldn't be the kind of image you want to project, but I'm not sure we can solve everything with signage.
Part of the problem with this one is that obviously it's in violation of the ordinance. But on the other hand, I think it's really nice looking.
or we can let some compliments.
I said, oh, there's that thing that we got the picture of, yeah.
But then what happens? We have to approve it every time Pasquazi's puts up their, full light signage?
So far, I like Bob's idea.
Yeah.
Push the question down the road a year.
We're good at punt, well, we're not good at punting, but we enjoy it.
Bring in somebody who could help, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, okay.
And maybe work with, maybe have a session with your tenants, see, because what we don't want is like neon, there's, right? I mean,
Well,
there's a point that doesn't
Things that are
work.
not gonna be allowed.
But it's finding that, right, but having said that, I mean, someone may say this shouldn't be allowed, because that's, this is so there is a line, right? It's just finding that line. We want our businesses to be successful, we want our landlords to have successful buildings. But, we all knew what we're hopefully renting or buying, from the ordinances, so it's not always up to us to redeem a contract. It's like buying a house and saying, I need it in our bedroom, but you can't, because there's no more room left to build. That's not the city's fault, you bought the wrong size house. So it's the same thing, we can't be held responsible for the rules that you buy into, right? So we can feel bad for you, but we can't feel bad that the rules are there. But we can feel if the rules are being applied incorrectly, which we feel it's starting to happen. So I think that's where we are. Change those rules.
So if you're okay with us not voting on your item tonight,
Yep.
you have the year to keep them up, assuming the village board approves the tenant sign criteria for the center, and we could take that time to rewrite the sign code
So then,
possibly and see what we come up with.
when August comes up, I should just leave what I have and not change nothing, because that's when the change would come again. So you're saying I should just wait the 12 months or maybe, hopefully sooner?
That's up to you.
Yeah, I say you do what you want for a year.
Yeah.
This is a free-for-all out there.
Well, just in the two windows, not in the other
Yeah.
window.
So we're talking about a calendar year to the end of this year or to the end of the?
12 months.
12 months, okay, from
Yeah.
today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Let's come up with something good.
Yeah, that's what we'll do.
That will work for everyone.
Yeah, no,
No,
It's a
we'll
great
continue to work with you and with Rob and everything.
yeah,
And every other building out there that has that sort of a need.
yeah.
Good grief, we've got a kayak sitting on bricks out there.
Yeah.
Which we specifically gave a variance for. It could happen again.
Yeah. How about a big blow-up wine bottle?
Yeah,
Right.
Okay, so we don't need to do anything with this then. We're,
withdraw.
Fine. Well, thank you, and if we have any other ideas before,
Well,
Mike,
yes,
I will email you.
we'll
and-
present it.
and we can
Yeah,
go
let
from
me
there.
know, and I'll pass them on.
Perfect.
Yep, thanks for
Thank
coming.
you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Alvin, for
Thanks.
bringing your concerns. Wow. We got an education.
Yeah.
okay, what else have we got here, Michael? We got all
It's a
these
tough one.
Well,
Code
Glenn is
things.
here to talk to us about the proposed code amendments regarding site plan review.
I saw him sitting back there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the ABR, good evening. I like your approach, by the way. I'll make sure to bring it to the PCZBA. Do whatever you want for a year, we'll come back. Solve a lot of problems that way.
Worked with my kids. They've only been in jail twice.
So, but glad to be with you here tonight. We've gone ahead and have drafted up kind of a mock ordinance, gone through legal, gone through a few rounds of review here as village staff in response to our discussion earlier about site plan changes. So high-level remarks, and then we can go through a few individual items, or happy to answer any questions, of course. So the first is, as this group intended, we've extended site plan review to all non-residential properties. Really, calling it site plan review would be a bit of a misnomer. We've renamed it design review, design approvals, really focusing in on that concept of looking at design. We've kind of tried to clear up here in section B, what specifically, A and B, what specifically is the ABR looking at? What are you trying to achieve? What triggers this body's review? And conversely, what would not trigger review? We've added in some language that, if accepted by the village board, would see many applications approved directly by the ABR. They wouldn't have to go to the village board for, a second step of approval. Everything except a few circumstances, so construction of a new building, enlargement of an existing building by more than 400 square feet, or when site plan is bundled up with something else, like a variation or a special use permit, something like that. Those would have to go to the village board. Most of the minor items you see would stay here at this body and be disposed of here. You'll forgive me, my voice is having a little bit of trouble tonight. And then the last that I don't think this group has talked about a whole lot before our prior meeting, but that did come out of our prior meeting, was trying to give the building commissioner some room to approve design approvals directly for minor items. What we've drafted here essentially has 4 criteria. So the first is it's mid-construction. This body has already issued a design approval, I should say. They're in the process of implementing it. It's not 5 years later we have a minor thing. Second, there's a percentage requirement as far as the percentage of an elevation that's changing. So we need some quantitative measurement. We say, look, take a plan, look at the elevation, shade in what you're changing. If it's more than 20% of the elevation, it has to come to this body. If not, the building commissioner could dispose of it. The third, doesn't move any building, any circulation element by a significant amount, 20 feet or 25% between, buildings and circulation elements, anything in the lot line. Again, trying to have some dimensional control. And then finally, just common sense that the building commissioner would find the same standards are met as you would that are set out in the first section. So a fairly constrained ability for things to be approved without coming to you. The building commissioner always would have the ability to send things to you that he or she wasn't comfortable with approving, but wanted to try to lay out a first pass at reacting to that. So a couple discussion points to start, or we can go to questions, whichever your preference is. The first would be how we've tried to treat landscape language towards the back, trying to balance the realistic ability of a landowner to keep up their landscape and our wants that they try to do so in conformance with the plan. And then second, I wanted to talk about and make sure there was some comfort with the idea of how we've laid out the parameters for the building commissioner and his review of certain design approvals.
Just because it happens to be in my face right now, I mean, the deal about the minor adjustments, and trying to establish a percentage of change on an elevation, I think that doesn't probably make sense. It seemed to me like you would say something like anything that dramatically, that alters the appearance. And I'm not talking about adding shutters or things like that, but I'm thinking about, fundamentally changes the appearance of the building. And I don't know how you would say that in any more concise terms.
And we did, in response to that, Mr. Chairman, we did look at that a bit. Our concern was just, I guess more than anything, could you do it? Perhaps. From a defensibility standpoint, we think it's the most legally defensible. It's the most, it avoids the fewest problems if there's sort of a bright line. There's a measurement and.
It's language that appeases the lawyers.
Yes.
You have a percentage of the facade, you have something measurable and quantifiable, then that's what makes the lawyers happy.
Yeah, but I thought the same thing that Bob does, that 20% is,
I mean, I don't care about the lawyers. It makes no sense
Yeah.
from an architectural standpoint.
no,
Okay.
yeah.
It just truly doesn't. I mean, I could say, well, I'm gonna take 20% of block 1 and cover it with drive-it.
But,
And that,
right, but so the way it works, though, is staff can always pass it on to the ABR, just because it's
I
less
know
than
you
20%.
can, but it's still,
Right, it gives them the possibility that they could approve that.
Yeah.
It still gives them the ability to pass it on.
and that's not a good example.
Right.
But I'm with Bob, the 20% just doesn't make sense. You take something like the similar to similar ordinance, which, really doesn't try to define anything aesthetically, and it
Right.
says, there's a fundamental interest in being able to take something and say, I'm not gonna decide this myself, it's gotta have some greater review. And the 20% rule says, you don't have to have the review. It's just not right. I'm with Bob, what you do on 20% matters.
I don't know how you measure 20%.
You would, as we envision it, you would just go to the plan sheet, you'd have the elevation there, you just box off what's changing. So let's say a window would change shape, you'd box out the window, always room for some interpretation. You compare the size of what you boxed out to the size of the rest, and that's a percentage.
Yeah, so from a staff point of view, yes, it tells you what you need to do, but it's also a bean counter answer to what is a more human problem than a number.
Certainly, not trying to disagree with you.
And if they did this minor review, do you still have to supply the same amount of information? Or is it I come in just with a drawing and say, here's the elevation, there's no other supportive documents? Like, what does a minor review,
Yeah, you would still need to provide the same amount of documentation.
so you'd have all the materials, like, so,
Right,
but
yeah,
he would just bring it
exactly.
to the desk?
Right,
And
right.
The section, what if you were to change it so that it says, at the beginning of section 4, it says, the subject development upon his determination that, and continue it with what's in Roman numeral 3 below, the adjustment is consistent with the purpose of this section, and delete everything in between.
So that is something we had originally looked at. We could, if that's this group's desire to move forward with, we can try to go ahead with that.
If you did something like that, what it really boils down to is that Mike is put in a position of making a judgment call, which you are put in with this thing anyway.
Right.
And
I
really
think
what it
that's-
says is you've got to make a judgment call.
I think that's a good point, and it's possible to combine the two, too, to say, if the building commissioner is confident that it's consistent with the purpose of this chapter and prior approvals, and if it's less than 20%. So it would emphasize that the 20% isn't necessarily such an important thing. It's putting a limit on what the building commissioner can consider, but he's considering whether it's consistent with the approval and consistent, with the past approval and consistent with the purpose of the chapter.
Like, what if you had a building that was mostly glass, and they decided to change the glass so that it's some other shape or color? That's minor but consistent. Well, if the glass is more than 20%, then you couldn't approve it. It would have to come back here. But if
Right.
it's a minor change, why bring it back?
Right, well, that's a good point, yeah.
Well, the other thing, and, I've been through probably 5 or 6 or 7 village managers in my 40, whatever it is, years here. And Drew is pretty good at this stuff, and Mike is pretty good at this stuff. Not all of these guys would have been good at this stuff.
I am definitely not good at this stuff. I am definitely not good at this stuff, just to put that on the record.
You probably are better than many. But anyway, so we have to think not only of the present office holders right now, but what might be coming down the pike. I mean, good Lord, we could have an attorney as a village president.
because it is assuming a qualification that's not required for that
Yeah.
position.
And that's what bothers me.
Yeah.
It's, you can alter a building, but it somehow is within the parameters of what the building intended to be.
Yeah.
You can,
And I would almost think that the building commissioner would not want that responsibility. I think if it was me, like if I had to review like a menu, like food or something, I have no idea, I wouldn't want to be the sole of that's going out to the public. I think that's maybe almost too much of a responsibility.
I think Bob's right, it depends on who the building commissioner is.
Well, that's just
I know
part
of
of
some
it, yeah.
building commissioners that would have no problem with that. Others would be scared to death of it. So I agree with,
Yeah, that's another great.
And I think the way we envision it is the building commissioner would feel very free to pass it on to the ABR if it's a significant change. Of course, it is, worth keeping in mind that 20 years down the road, people may lose sight of what our original intent was
Yep.
when different people are doing it. But our thought was more along the lines of, you said you were gonna do limestone of this material sample from this quarry. It's not available, you're gonna do instead limestone of this material sample from this quarry. Oh, looks the same.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna approve it and not make you go through two.
Well, that's
drive
an
up
easy
here for
one.
two meetings
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all that.
And that feels right, that,
Well, we can certainly add in Bob's language.
Well, I don't know what my language would be.
Right where you started, that there should be a review if the change fundamentally alters the building's appearance. And if that's in addition to some of the other things. I mean, we can also keep the 20% that says there will be a review if it's more than 20%, but we can also state as an additional bullet point.
was the 20%,
language.
I'm so sorry.
I was done.
Was the 20% like a proven red line?
I mean, the concept is what matters more than the percentage. You can move that up or down. It's more of your comfort level.
Yeah.
But the general concept of this much
Right,
of an
you
elevation.
need a target, at least, to say, because 20 is a lot. I mean, I could ruin a building with 20% easily. That's not hard to do.
It just depends on what the change is. If it's one brick that was not available and you're
Right.
doing this brick and it's
yeah.
almost the same color.
And that's an intent, that's not, right? I mean, to me,
Yeah,
that's a
right.
different than changing. Yeah, I think that's an alteration to something that's already approved, right?
Right.
Versus someone coming in with a fresh project
Right.
and then you have to make a decision.
I'm just thinking about the Ferrari store, and when they put the new facade and changed the front door around, if you take the percentage of that building, that's probably not even 20%.
Right.
But look at what it did.
Yeah.
It made a whole different
Right.
situation there.
Right, and then, I don't know, does that put the commissioner in a tenuous position, like, I don't approve this? But you're saying it's 20%, prove to me that this isn't minor, I'm just moving the door, that sounds very, to your point, but it's a big deal, if that's
It's a big deal.
there's a lot of secondary
Yeah.
issues sometimes.
A couple points I would note at that. So one, important to remember that percentage, the way this is written, would be on one elevation. So, you're at least not talking about the whole building, you're always talking about one side. The second would be, even if you don't necessarily know which staff member would be here in the future, you would have some assurance that unless, in the very unlikely event, you have a design approval, a design's under construction, we change building commissioners, and then the second commissioner has to look at this. The first commissioner will have been in the room for the initial approval. They'll be familiar with your interests and concerns, and probably will be fairly well-informed on your intent, just from that time limit on these having to come during construction.
I guess the other thing I would say, Glenn, that this minor adjustments by building commissioner paragraph here that has the 20% in it, that is only applying to adjustments to an approval that's been made by the ABR, right? That's not applying to a new project coming in to alter an existing building.
So it was any building.
No, that's,
Any existing building.
yeah.
That's the way I read
It says the building commissioner may approve minor adjustments to a design approval that are requested during the timely completion of the subject development upon his determination that all the following conditions are satisfied.
Yeah, so that's a guardrail, and that's a guardrail that you could remove, but we put in anticipating perhaps these concerns. But the idea would be, you issue a design approval,
Okay,
that person is still in the process of putting it in the ground, so perhaps there's something is unfeasible or unobtainable, and that's revealed in the process of development, and they get to continue in an expedited fashion. But when it's built, they can't come back and take this shortcut the way this is written right now. They would have to come before this body even for something that's minor in how it's described here, if that makes sense.
So if I understand what you just said, Glenn, if I kind of read, well, not even between the lines, if somebody comes and they're gonna build a 100,000-foot building somewhere, and they go through the process, and we approve it, we make adjustments, whatever happens, and it ends up going out of here approved, and something changes for whatever reason, then the building commissioner has the ability to say, this 20% is, I'm gonna make that decision whether this is right on the whole cohesive package. I mean, I really object to this, big time.
Okay.
The more I think about it, the more I object to it, that it just flies in the face of what we're trying to do, which is create better architecture than what we have. So there.
We included this at your request. We are more than happy to exclude it.
It's not a big deal to take
requesting
out
this.
paragraph number 4.
Well, you know, I don't think you just throw everything out.
Right, just
because there are
paragraph number
times-
4, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But I'm really not concerned about the attorneys being able to measure something. You know, when we do the HPC 50%, you know, it became the issue, you know, is 50% demo in the inside, does that count? Or is it outside? You know, but you can still measure it.
You can still measure it.
Yeah, this is arbitrary.
So what happens if you keep 4 and you just delete all the subpoints? Then it specifically says the building commissioner may approve minor adjustments.
Yeah, that's a thought.
That's,
I would suggest that the dialogue's kind of moving in contrary directions. On
It
one
is,
hand, you're
right.
concerned about, you know, unbridled discretion.
But I think it is actually more logical than it seems, because the 20% kind of gives someone a false suggestion of where they should, how they should determine the boundary.
They think
you
they're
know?
good.
It's the significance of the change, which doesn't necessarily relate to the percentage of the
It could be
facade.
2%.
I mean, if you have this brown brick and this brown brick and they look the same, that brick may cover 98% of the facade or 80% or something, but the significance of the change may be 0.
right, it's not
You
a,
know.
a minor scale adjustment, it's a minor adjustment to an approved element.
Right.
I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, think about changing the proportion on 860. Mises, I mean, you don't change Mises proportions.
Right.
Oh, well, what's the difference between, 30.7 meters,
Right.
and 39? Quite a bit.
To further establish that I would be bad at being the building commissioner here, I have no idea what you just said.
Mies is a very, everything's perfect.
Got it.
Yeah, that's all.
It's all about proportion,
It's all perfectly.
and
Yeah, that's where we started to say God is in the details.
that's right.
The problem is this big. It's not 20%, the problem is this big.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
I'm just thinking of one in Highwood that occurred within the last year on the Hotel Moraine. The new owner put a sign up that was the top part of it was gold and yellow, and the bottom part of it was blue. The city down there didn't like it at all. But if we were doing the 20% thing, that would have fit within the 20% thing totally.
but did they do that on their own, or did they
The
have an
developer-
ABR down there?
They have an ABR.
Well, they must have been sleeping when they let them do that whole building that way.
oh my gosh. Can we talk about that now or no? I don't think that's a, yeah.
It used to be Ramada Inn many
Yeah.
years ago, and I hate to say that it looked better then.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't think much of the way Ramada Inns look.
No.
There was something else, and I should have outlined it here. Not in this particular thing. You don't specifically, unless I'm just missing it, talk about site plan. That's
In-
what parts
in
of the
terms
site
of-
plan.
Yeah.
I'd
So-
like to address that.
Huh?
I would like to address that in a rather oblique way, because I wasn't here last month, and I missed the discussion that decided this should be design review. And, we can, for us, design is a boilerplate word. We can talk about topographic design, we can talk about hydraulic design, to us, it's a specific body that's a science. But to everybody else outside those windows, it's something else. Like when the three of us were trying to talk to the trustee about what were design guidelines, and one of the first comments we got back was, I don't want you picking my stuff for me. And that wasn't what was on the table at all, but that's what design review means. It means
So
the
we
taste
had this
police.
discussion, and we had all kinds of things that we were talking about, and I don't remember what they were.
Yeah, building and grounds review, site and structure review,
Appearance
property
review.
assessment and review, site assessment guidelines. I mean, site belongs in the word, not design.
But we're changing the whole thing to basically, if I'm right, we're not calling this a design of a site plan review process anymore. We're calling it a design review process. And that encompasses everything. Now, we didn't think, we had the same conversation a little bit about what does design mean? We know, but, what should we call it? Aesthetic review? No, that's kind of snotty. What do you call it?
Yeah, I mean, even building and grounds to me is stronger than saying design review. Design is the taste police.
Building and grounds sounds like the guy that's, in charge of the country club.
Exactly, but, we're talking about things like, 20% and 25%
Yeah.
reviews. I mean, people respond to that more specific, non-subjective language, Design as an adjective is just so weak. So I know you decided it last time when I wasn't here, but, a site assessment review guidelines, I mean, site is important.
Well,
We're not talking
but that's
about,
not all we're doing. And I think, one of the things we did is we talked about architectural review process instead of design. And I guess I don't know why we didn't decide on that. You were here, right? Who wasn't here?
Well, it seems like under B, regulated activities, 2 and 3 would encompass something like site plan review.
But
It
if you
just
look at
doesn't
the
say it.
code, if you look at the code right now, I assume this is what you're talking about. The code right now, as it reads, the Architecture Review Commission, whatever we're called, is responsible for similar, dissimilar, I mean, it's so bogus that it should never have been written, and it's been that way forever. And so this is to replace that intro, right? The purpose of this commission? Am I right, Glenn?
It's to replace a section in the zoning code that talks about how you conduct site plan review. And that section, we're pretty sure was adopted, it reads like it was adopted from how a plan commission typically does site plan review, not an architectural or design body. So it talks about things like engineering review of drainage. I'm fairly certain this group has probably
No.
never discussed that subject. So,
And it's also been awkward when, it's technically an awning is site plan review, or someone changing their windows is site plan review, because there's no site plan really associated with those
No,
items.
that's why that whole heading should go away as the main topic of what the ABR does.
Right.
We call the ABR, right? So what's wrong with that? Why didn't we stick with that?
What's that? Why didn't we stick with what?
This commission is called the Architectural Board of Review.
Right, yeah, this isn't changing the name of the commission.
No, but in the code.
Right, we
Right.
could call it
the-
architectural
the-
review
The
instead of
comments,
design review.
the heading for our purpose is bogus. If you look up the code and do the first piece of it that talks about what we do.
Oh,
Talks
okay.
about reviewing signs, talks about some site plan stuff, and similar, dissimilar.
Oh, okay.
That's pretty much it. Am I right, Glenn? You looking at it?
I'm pulling it up right now.
It said that way before I got here.
Okay. Okay.
so is it Architectural Board of Review Guidelines? Is that the best title?
I don't know.
Bob, if I'm picturing what you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. So there's an administrative internal document that spells out some of these things that's used to help orient new members. If you're picturing what I am, it's not actually in the code of ordinances. So the code just says you're empowered to do whatever the code empowers you to do. Very specific. Of which one of those is your sign review and another is site plan or architectural building and ground review.
If I look at this now under A, the purpose, I would shift 1 and 2.
You would exchange them, so number 2 is number 1 and vice versa?
That's what I would do, yeah. That would probably make number 4 the last one. You're doing this in any order of significance.
Yeah, and then number 8 would move up to number 3 then. I mean, you know, some of them are,
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, health, safety, and welfare is the reason to exist for building codes in general, so. You're laughing, Neil. We're reinventing the wheel?
I'm just looking at all the arrows I just
Yeah.
drew in here.
You know, there's something that's unclear, and it shouldn't be. And maybe I'm just being up since 4 o'clock this morning. It should be clearer that we're looking at new buildings or buildings that have an addition when we're talking about buildings. And the lawyer language here is, you know, commence any new additional use or continued any use. It's just a little bit, why not just say what it is?
So I would respond, and number 2, you do that. So you say construct a building or structure, alter the exterior appearance of a building or structure, enlarge a building or structure, or remodel, you know, in any way that affects the exterior appearance of any building or structure. So what number 1 is directed to, which is a little bit opaque perhaps, we can discuss if you'd like to change it, is we've had, at least on a couple occasions, you know, where we have just the way processes work in the village. We have an existing site, it's a conforming site. Someone new may go in there and start a new occupancy. And, you know, this board would never theoretically see it, perhaps except to do their sign. That person isn't required to do any type of improvements at all. They can hang a shingle and they can go. To illustrate one case where this has mattered, so Block 3, as you might remember, has, you know, you have a parking lot that goes, the whole site spans 5 lots, right? There's the bank building and there's parking lot. And now one of those will no longer exist. One of those, you know, those eastern 2/5 of the lot has been sold. At some point, those parking lots will go away. They won't service the principal building. Right now, if you read it, it's ambiguous as to if you can do anything about it. Our position is certainly that you could force those people to go back to site plan review and to further improve their parking lot and so on. But this would make it clear that, you know, whenever you have a new occupancy coming in like that body will at least have to come in here. You may not necessarily want that. We can strike that section right out.
We should probably tweak it in one way, because if you're moving into like a 3rd floor office space in Block 1, and you're not changing anything on the outside, you know, you don't have any sign or anything, you're just moving in, you wouldn't have a reason to come here. So we should.
And I would finesse my point a little bit, yeah, and say,
Facility,
yeah.
you know.
So that is true. it is at least, it's changes in use, not changes in occupancy, so it is a little more broad, but you are right in that there are, when you have these multi-tenant spaces, this, written as it would, might see more of those come to you than you would like, so we
I
could trim
understand
that
what
in.
you're saying now, I get that, I mean, you're kind of using that as an example, but I still would, the most important thing we do is look at construction. And I would reverse then number 1 and 2, just flip them around, because you're right, that is important, that somebody has a handle on that.
Yeah.
I guess I'm still having a problem with your description of number 1. If somebody moves into the bank building and they make no changes to the exterior of the building, I'm having trouble understanding why they have to come before design review for that.
And I guess describing it out loud, I am wondering a little bit of the same as I'm thinking through this.
I
but-
think a past discussion we had on the staff level about that was, the bank had 2 parking lots. You know, the bank had the eastern parking
Right.
lot plus their main parking lot. So if someone moves in and wants to use now, what's now the western property by itself, they're making a change in that they're using it without having the eastern parking lot, and that in itself is a change.
if
So I
they
think,
said-
but that's unique to that property and kind of
It's a niche example.
topic of the
Satisfy
code
parking
change.
requirements, then that's a legitimate reason.
Right,
If there,
possibly,
if there's no parking requirements, that,
Right.
I think
right,
in that,
possibly.
in that instance, that wouldn't even get to us. If it's either okay within the parking requirements or not, the zoning board's gonna deal with that before it ever gets to us.
Right, that's probably true.
We'll relook again at that particular section.
But I understand what it is now, I didn't
Yeah.
get it, but I still would, whatever it is, I would flip 1 and 2, because the first thing we do is look at buildings.
Right.
Okay?
And just for me, as if I'm just reading this, just regulated activities, that even the first, just for clarity, like if I'm an architect going new to Lake Bluff reading, I'm reading, design review shall be required before any person may commence any new or additional use. I don't know, that seems a little clumsy, just like any person may. I don't, maybe there's a way to put project instead of person. I don't know, it just feels, maybe that's not an issue, but it just, that first sentence feels awkward for some reason. Usually we don't talk about a person doing something, it's the project.
Oh,
Well,
I'm speculating what the lawyers would say again, but I would respond that when we are writing someone a notice to cease or a citation, we're writing that to a person.
But I never say an architect may design a stair to meet, you just say the stair may have to meet. It's more about the project, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
but in this instance, I think it is the person. Well, in this
Well, it's the
particular
project,
thing.
it's not the person. A project may not commence without X. And I said it's a stupid argument, but I'm just reading this as, it feels very, like, not at a tiered level of, it just bothered me for a minute. I can get way over it.
What if you took out person
tweak
and
it.
said
Yeah.
required before,
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. It's not a person doing, it's a project. We're not,
well, don't say project either.
well, right, I'm just saying that it's not about the person, it's about the project.
Right, design review shall be required before
Yeah, just,
constructing, altering, enlarging, or remodeling.
Right, all
You
of
know,
these things.
Right.
yeah, it just
yeah,
seems
exactly.
cleaner
You don't
than
need
person
throwing
out
the
of there.
person in there.
Right, yeah,
Most often it's a company.
right.
Right. And then my only other thing, just as a frustration when I read codes, is like if I'm new again and I'm doing a house and I'm reading all this, I'm going through all of this, right? And then I get to exempt activities. Like, because I wouldn't know that this is like non-residential. I'd be going through all this, I'm like, oh my gosh, you go through all this.
Well, that was the other thing I was gonna mention, yeah.
So I would rather get the exempts up front, that's a little bit cleaner, than
Well-
bury it in the middle.
There is a, I don't know where it is in the code, but the ABR does not do residential unless it's part of a PUD or,
Multifamily residential
Multifamily.
in essence.
but that's not kind of called out anywhere unless it's elsewhere.
Well, that's here as part of the exemption to this proposed code change. Single family is exempt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, it
we-
is?
we would do
Okay.
multi-
That's what I'm saying, it's,
Yeah.
it's buried, it's not that it's buried, but I'd rather see those exemptions up front
Up front?
Yeah.
Well, that's a
than,
good point. 'cause
than
you go
buried,
through all
because
this.
it's frustrating.
Yeah,
Because I'm like panicking, you know, as an architect, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just doing an addition, you know, and then I'm like, oh, you know,
We'll move that up.
so that would be.
Matt, I agree with you on that. I wrote a note on here before I got to the second page that said, where does this limit it to commercial properties, meaning non-residential?
Yeah.
And then I got to the second page and
Right.
found it.
yeah.
And it seems like it should be right in the very first paragraph.
Yeah. And,
We do some residential though, so.
well, but not according to this.
Not single-family residential.
Not single- yeah.
Well, we do some of that, too.
We do.
Similar, dissimilar.
Which is a different section of the
That's a
code.
different, yeah.
We've
So
done the
this is,
sanctuary, we've done
Yeah,
Armor Woods.
that's the PUD,
I mean, there
that's
are,
what I mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
And-
First one we did
yeah.
like that was Belforet. That's the only way they got the permit to do it.
and then my other thing, just real quick for me, on D4,
Part of the code that says if you're building a house,
I don't know if we need to require them to do three-dimensional
and
renderings.
it's too similar
of-
to the neighbors,
I know, that seems a little,
or if it's too dissimilar to the neighbors, then it has to.
I think we can read, I don't know, that's just me. In Evanston, I have to do three-dimensional renderings for everything, and it's, you know, we're all very astute at reading plans, and I don't know, it just feels.
Speak for yourself.
But I don't know, it just feels like if you can't read plans and elevations at this level,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be at this level.
Well, there's also another, and I can't think of the wording, but I've seen it many times, where it says something about, you know, enough information to be totally descriptive of what the project is.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean, you know, flyby.
Did Target give us a three? I never saw three-dimensional for Target.
No.
No. We did that whole thing without one three-dimensional picture.
I don't think we did.
Visualize the whole rectangle.
I can visualize and I can visualize the corner. I didn't visualize that meathead sign, that's a frustrating part.
No, that, and I like skiing across the driveway.
Yeah.
I tell you what, it does slow traffic down.
It does, I'm trying to- so
Anyway,
that's just
we
my thing. I
digress.
don't know if that's,
Again, that's up to you, what you want to see to evaluate an application. We're more than
Yeah,
happy to strike that.
I think if it's not required.
What'd you just strike?
Well, I'm suggesting, I didn't strike anything. I'm suggesting that we don't require someone to do a three-dimensional rendering.
Oh,
Of
no,
a
I
project.
would say something that is, you know,
Yeah.
enough descriptive information.
Yeah.
Yes. Plan,
If
site
something
plan,
is complicated, we
elevations.
may ask for clarification somehow.
What else?
On that same page, I'm looking at item C, exempt activities. Number 2 says painting or refinishing of exterior surfaces. Well, that could be a total, complete change.
It says existing surfaces.
You know, if something was approved to be red and they change it to be yellow.
But we don't judge on that. We're trying not to judge on,
Colors?
I guess that's not true.
I remember when,
Is that true?
when Rob Douglas came in and wanted to paint the village market, when it was the village market.
Yeah,
Red wall and the.
yeah, I guess that is a, yeah.
It does seem like a red herring to call out painting as opposed to other types of changes, though.
Yeah.
I think it would be good to just strike number 2 and not go there.
Yeah.
On number 3, I don't understand it. An exempt activity is a change to signage subject to review by the ABR pursuant to Chapter 10.
So that says you will get a review.
Yeah, so it's just important to remember here, maybe a theme I'm hearing. So this isn't everything the ABR does. This is one gear of 6. And so all this is saying is that you don't have to do the formality of doing a site plan review or design review, a architecture review,
In
at the same time you do a sign review.
And the significance of that is most of the site plan reviews go to village board, whereas some of the sign approvals don't. So you don't want to require both approvals of the same thing.
The confusion
is it
I've
might-
got is what is the exempt activity? Change to signage? Or change to
Signage is exempt
subject to
from
the
this
review?
chapter because it's regulated in the other
Yeah.
provision.
That's a whole nother,
Yeah, that's
Right.
just a different review process.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I just think that needs some rewording.
Okay, we can clear it up.
Yep.
I mean, you could even just say changes the signage subject or pursuant to chapter 10, right? And instead of going through all the other review. Maybe.
Well, the signage review is already covered somewhere else, so do
That's
they
what I'm saying,
really
if-
need to do it? Why does it need to be here?
just say
Well, you
signage.
just want to clarify you're not requiring it to go through two types of review.
Yeah.
It
So I
doesn't
just
have
think
to
if
go
we
through
say-
this plus the signage
Yeah,
review.
I think we're just saying changes the signage review pursuant to chapter 10 of this title. I think that's a cleaner. And then when they go for, so for number 4, just out of my own, total demolition of a principal improvements upon a site, so where do they, so that's a different, right, that's another, is that pursuant to some other?
I mean, so there's demolition regulations, but just in the sense that, you know, legally, it's hard to tell someone you can't demolish something unless it has some sort of, say, a historic value or something else. But
Right.
by and large, you know, if Target wanted to come in and said, we're done having a Target here, for some reason, we want it to be a grassy field again, it's just it's very difficult to justify that a property owner shouldn't be able to do that without other facts.
But should you say, well, okay,
It's an exemption, so
right, yep,
Doesn't require design, I don't know
doesn't
how we
require
would.
us to do anything.
yep, great,
Because that is covered elsewhere.
yeah. Do we need to say it's covered elsewhere, or you just read it here? I mean, does this give
Did they
someone
have
an out?
anything there at all?
It's really not covered elsewhere because single families go through a demolition review, but there isn't a review for commercial demolition. I mean, other than permit review by staff, but.
Yeah, but this
there's no
doesn't-
commission review.
But we're not clarifying,
What would we review on the design of demolition?
only like the historic, like we had that historic.
Yeah, historic is the only
Right,
time. But
that's
even
all.
that was an odd one.
Yeah.
You normally wouldn't do that.
Right, yeah, okay, great, I'm just curious, that's,
That was a good conversation.
yeah.
Yeah, the trouble with listing the exempt activities is that this isn't all of them. So starting to list them becomes counterproductive.
Well, I think it does. So I'm just curious about the landscape. Because it doesn't specifically talk about it. Maybe it does under the site plan review. Other than the maintenance stuff, which I don't see that that's got anything to do with what we do.
So this is just, if you remember our past conversation, there was this talk of, you know, how do you try to keep, when you see a site plan, perhaps you're looking at a site plan that talks about these very extensive or generous landscape improvements, you know, arborvitae in front of a dumpster, let's say, and you approve the site plan, and 5 years later, the arborvitae is dead. There's really, it's a stretch to say that someone would be required to go and put in new arborvitae to continue to comply with the site plan. Again, legally, our position would be, yes, you're required to do that, you're required to stay in conformance, but it's a grayer area perhaps than it should be. And so, even though it looks a little unrelated, all this is saying is you have a site plan. Obviously, a building's going to be here. Buildings don't shrivel up and die, but these landscape improvements, they might. And so you're required to maintain them. If that doesn't work, you're required to replace them. And so that and the enforceability of your site plan ordinance hopefully give you a firmer foundation.
Well, if you think, I mean, I guess I get some of that, you know, if you change the landscaping plan, it's 10 years later because something has to change. Is that what you're talking about? Things die, things change, things, whatever it is.
Well, just in the sense that, you know, you're not, let's be very cynical here, but just that you're not sold a bill of goods, or that you don't end up with an end product that, you know, doesn't match. You know, if that landscaping was part of why you approved a particular plan,
But isn't that part of
maintain
the original enforcement? That's not maintenance. That's like, wait a minute, you said you're gonna give us a 4-inch tree and you gave us an 1.5 inches.
yeah. And you know, another approach could be to strike this section F and just rely on that original enforcement. But if you wanted to communicate, you know, what the expectation is clearly, we expect that, you know, n number of years later, you'll have either gotten a new site plan approval, or I can take out your last plan, hold it up, and it looks like the plan, more or less. This would be the kind of the firmest way we can think of doing that.
But does that belong in the design review procedures, or the, you know, this whole 3 pages of stuff? Because the whole thing seems like it's enforcement unless somebody really wants to make a change, for whatever reason.
Again, it's, you know, it's up to you. If your preference would be that we, you know, kind of rely on just not doing something contrary to the site plan.
Well, it doesn't
can-
really say that, though.
Yeah, it just says you're not loving your,
Because you're not necessarily taking care of it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say you did a bait and switch.
Well,
It should probably have like a time period attached to it, for the landscape maintenance. Like a period of one year or 2 years from the time of completion. And as long as the design intent doesn't change drastically, I think they're, you know, they should be okay. But you can't just put it in and just walk away and
Yeah.
not do anything, so.
well, but it also doesn't say what happens if
Right.
yeah.
you walk away and don't do anything.
Right.
You're requiring a new landscape plan, or you're requiring a
Right.
new maintenance plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, again, another quirk of Lake Bluff, you know, being a small town, not wanting to be overly burdensome. You know, there are some towns that really get into this landscape plan, landscape approval cycle. I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah.
some of you are familiar with it. So we're really just trying to get the best of both worlds and not getting to that level of detail, but still having some standards, some.
But are we seeing, are there any places that we feel that this is teeth that we need in the code? Like, are there,
Well, you know, a year or two ago, when we were talking about the signs at 71 Waukegan Road, where North Shore University Health Systems went in, someone brought up the fact that they cut down a few of their big old pine trees there. Was asking, you know, what they were doing in place of those.
but
Yeah,
that's
this
not a
would be-
maintenance, but that's a totally different, I think that's different than this.
The maintenance,
Yeah.
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 But it's just, if we want criteria that would bring them back for approval of a new landscape plan, then
Well,
this would be
that's a
the
little
chance
different
to
than
put
what
it
this
in.
says, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I think
Okay.
that's all correct, that we
Yeah.
should be doing that. And
Yeah.
we should, but to do
Yeah.
something we have no control over,
Yeah.
it's really not in our wheelhouse, so to speak.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know whose wheelhouse it is in, you know, it's,
Mm-hmm.
who drives around town and says, you need to water your trees, you know? You know?
Yeah.
Because I tell you what, the village isn't good at taking down all of our, I mean, we have so many D-level trees in our neighborhood. I mean, they would be the first for me to
know.
pull this on.
I know.
Because I have trees falling in my yard all the time because they're so dead. What is the caliper of trees that we require for tree protection during construction?
3 inches.
3?
Yeah,
Wow.
That's small.
yeah.
What kind of protection
A fence.
Drip line,
Just a fence?
Yeah, right,
just like drip line protection, right?
right,
Mm.
yeah,
Okay.
Is it really 3?
yeah.
We don't do drip line protection.
Yeah, the fence out at the drip line of the trees. Yeah, to keep
Well,
construction,
most-
well,
a lot
where
of those is-
possible, where
yeah.
possible.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
sometimes
happen
it's
to
not
notice-
possible, sometimes your tree covers the whole.
Yeah.
I went down
House
and
in
noticed
yard,
that
you know.
the magnificent
example
oak
I've
in Lake
seen of that
Forest,
is
it's by the, it's
Not
by
here in
the,
town, but in other
the new
towns,
apartments they're building down there.
where there's a
On
requirement
whatever,
to
whether
do
that, not
landscaping
Western,
in front of
McKen-
the
yeah,
cars that
maybe
they're
it is
gonna have on
Western,
display.
Western.
Yeah.
They put it in,
And
there's
there's a
never
tree
water.
out there and it's all by itself.
Exactly.
Been there
They're
for
putting it in
1,000
only
years.
because they have to.
And the drip line
They don't
on
want
that
it.
thing has gotta be
Lots
two
of
hundred
places
feet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a
Lots of
fence all,
instances where people
Yeah.
just have to put it in, but then they don't take care of
Should we then change this
it, and they don't replace it
on
instead.
D1? When we do a tree survey, make them do a 3-inch instead of 4-inch, because they need that information anyways.
Oh, yeah, probably so,
Good catch.
yep.
Because I was thinking is 8. 8 is like what I'm used to protecting.
Yeah,
3 is,
3 inches a stick.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a, you guys love trees here.
Not a stick, but
Yeah, but 3-inch, I can like snap it. If I can snap it, you shouldn't be protected.
What
is
do
the
you
way-
think? You're the guy.
well, it depends on if it's existing there. I mean,
Yeah.
is that what we're talking
Yeah.
about?
No.
So like if
3
I'm
inch
building a
is really
house,
small.
if I'm building a house and there's a 3-inch tree, I have to get rights to take up that 3-inch tree? That seems crazy.
Yeah.
It's not even a tree.
Well, it is a tree technically.
I'm just saying that's,
Yeah, it's, you know, it's like, yeah. It's a decent sized tree to buy and put in.
yeah.
Well, and it depends on the species in our tree ordinance too, you know.
Yeah.
You may opt to take one of those out.
Yeah, but that's fine. Again, it's sorry, we always go off on
No,
stupid
it's fine.
tangents.
Well,
Well,
sometimes
we've
things are
been
more
doing this
onerous
for
than
years,
they
right?
they
That
bear.
hasn't changed.
The tangents or the tree ordinance?
Good one.
The tree ordinance.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Correct.
okay, that's
Been the
just,
same for years.
yeah, of course, yeah, and that's fine.
Just don't do anything that's near a 3-inch.
Don't harm a 3-inch tree in Lake Bluff.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just don't let anybody see you.
yeah. I could get my little Red Ryder wagon and put it on it.
The tree that
Could always
was
move
down
it.
in front of my daughter's house was 68 inches.
Wow,
Biggest tree in Lake County.
wow,
Wow,
And it did this.
holy cow.
oh, wow.
Were you around when that happened? I don't think you,
Never heard of it.
huh?
Never heard of it.
Yeah, that was when we had the mini tornado
Yeah.
come down the street.
Yeah.
Branches were falling. Just
Yeah,
branches and trees.
yeah,
Anyway, we digress again.
again.
What else have we got to look at? What, we just bothering the life out of you, Glenn, with this stuff?
I have nothing but time, Mr. Chairman. We want to get this right.
I think that's not true.
Well, Glenn, are there things here that are particularly onerous to enforce? I mean, sometimes it's nice to do detail and sometimes not so much. I mean, do you have reservations about some of these classes?
I would defer to Mike on that. He's the enforcement officer for this section.
Yeah, no, I think we've addressed all that with these changes, so I think we're pretty good here.
I don't think we came to a resolution on F though, did we?
On what?
F? On our landscape maintenance, did we
Yeah, how do you
come
enforce
to
that?
something on that?
Well,
So,
it's not an active enforcement so much as it is, I mean, in all honesty, we would probably get a complaint. We would look, we would see there's things that aren't there that this body approved. We would use this section to write the letter and you'd
Okay.
go from there.
Yeah.
If there's different modes we could look at to get to the same result, or if this body would rather see, you know, your obligation to maintain is 1 year long and 2 year long, and then free reign, we can write it like that too.
It just seems like the word unlawful seems like crazy Stepfordy.
Yeah.
Stepfordy?
The cops are coming.
Stepford, you know, the Stepford neighborhoods?
Yeah.
What it doesn't say in here, though, is that you must conform to put in what you got approval for.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the only thing that we're responsible for.
We can reiterate that. So if you go back to B6, some high-quality lawyering, which is to say that, before any person may, with respect to any site or use for which design approval has been granted, do anything materially different from or in addition to what is shown, described, required, or approved therein, including any conditions, which is a very broad, perhaps slightly confusing way of saying you have to follow your site plan.
Yeah.
And so you could rely on this,
Yeah.
but
If I
just,
could understand that as a quick read.
yeah. But I mean, understand, if a tree dies and someone just takes it out, it's very hard to argue that they've done anything different than the site plan approval.
Yeah,
Tree died, that's not their fault, and they took it out, which we would probably like them to do. Now, could you still enforce it anyway? Yeah, probably.
I would try and clarify that sentence, or multiple sentences that you just read, which is, it's not straightforward, doesn't really, it says it, but I've got to wade through the language to see it. Must comply with what was originally approved. I can do all those words on one finger.
You're not getting paid by the
So
hour, though.
what's the next step forward? Would we look at another draft of this at our next meeting?
I sense that's probably where this needs to go. I'd ask two last questions for sure before we wrap up the debate. So first, procedure approval by village board. We sort of lined out 3 things that would go to the village board. Again, they'll be consulted on this, so this body isn't necessarily the last say there, but we want to make sure that you're comfortable with the lines of what's important enough the village board should look at and what this body you feel should be empowered to do on its own.
They have to approve all of this.
Today, they have to approve everything.
Well, point 2 has to be enlargement or modification of an existing building.
I don't think the village board has ever gone against the recommendations of the ABR, with the exception if they didn't know what they were quite approving, the sign. But other than that, I think everything else, they've never, any board has gone against our approvals that I can recall. Which is not the case with many communities. So where are we?
So there would be that, and then just to say this out loud, to confirm your intent on the minor adjustments section, what I'm hearing is there's still an interest in keeping that. There's still an interest in perhaps that authority only being during construction or during development, but we wanted to move away from this 20% language, from some of the quantitative language, try to find something that just emphasizes that these things are supposed to be minor in nature.
And, yeah,
So if that's,
do not dramatically affect, I wouldn't even say dramatically,
You said fundamentally before.
fundamentally, yeah. Is that what I said?
Very good word.
Man with words.
Yeah. And then,
I've
again,
got good words.
yeah, reading, because I don't have good words, so reading that first sentence, the building commissioner may approve minor adjustments to a design approval that are requested. Again, that seems kind of jumbled.
Split it up.
To a design approval. I mean, like, can you say approved design? Something that's more,
Yeah, approved design would be better than.
yeah, then design approval feels, again, in my head, I'm worrying about what that's meaning, and I'm forgetting the intent of the sentence.
and to some extent that exists today, so you use site plan as a noun, and so is it the site plan, or is it the thing you created when you approved it, or is it?
Right.
But we can workshop that. I think we've got enough guidance, we can definitely bring you a draft at your next meeting that tries to sand down some of these points and make sure you're comfortable with it.
Well, I have one more question on point number 4.
Sure.
So I'm fine if it says the building commissioner may approve minor adjustments to an approved design that does not fundamentally alter yada, yada, yada. And then 1, 2, 3, I think can go. And then the last sentence, if the building commissioner does not approve a request for a minor adjustment, the applicant must submit a new application. This is something that's in progress, and they have to start all over again with a new application and all of the big requirements? Or do you refer the modification to somebody? I mean, that sounds kind of onerous in its
I
level of
would say, I
enforcement.
agree with you, I hadn't thought of that,
A brand-new
would be,
application.
I mean, how many times have we had people come back just because we haven't finished with them?
Right.
And they,
Well-
we don't conclude, if somebody says, I have to change this, and somebody, the village says, well, you gotta get that to the ABR, don't start all over again, come back with your change, that's all it is.
Right.
Now, we want people to come back, because
Yeah.
what often happens is they say, hey, this costs too much, so now I'm doing this. We
Yeah.
don't want them to
Yeah.
just go do it, we want them to come back.
Right, but I asked earlier, like, what they have to submit to Michael for this, and it is that package, right? I mean, they have to submit something.
If that's what you would like them to submit,
Well, I mean, I guess that's the question. I thought they had to resubmit a package to you, right? Like that,
Well,
Like-
it's
So
a
they're-
package of what they wanna do, but
Yeah,
if
right.
they're smart, they won't do it other than a preliminary basis.
right,
And
Which section are we reading right now?
4
that
again. We're back on 4.
first page,
So it's
page,
it's
E4.
not the first page.
I'm sorry, E4.
E4, okay.
while you're looking, Mike, I mean, I
Right.
would note too that there's, the building commissioner can, on your behalf, essentially waive unnecessary requirements. There's some discretion there in
Sure.
pulling that back.
Yeah, like that brick. Like, if it's a brick thing, you don't have to do a whole thing, hopefully.
Right, exactly. That's right. Well, and I guess it relates to a larger unresolved debate that the gentleman who had an appeal before us in the fall brought up, which is when you list all these requirements everywhere in our code, to what extent is staff expected to have discretion? In other words, is the code a list that's the maximum you can be required to provide, and staff chooses from that list where it's applicable? Or is the code expected to specify only and exactly what you need in that situation, in each and every situation, so staff never needs to use discretion to select what you need? If you
I don't know
understand
how
what I'm
that's been,
saying.
that has not been resolved, and, I mean, that guy never tried to do anything in the city of Chicago, which is at the whim
Right.
of little Louis over here in the plan review
Right,
department.
yeah. I mean, the old school way was to list the maximum they could ever be required to do and say staff had discretion to choose less than that. Rather than to try to come up with a formula that lists each and every possible situation only and exactly what's needed for that situation.
Mike doesn't like my writing style,
No, I didn't say that.
just kidding.
Well, I think that's an important, I mean, this is probably the more important thing, like, out of all this, is like,
I'm putting mine away again.
how do you deal with these minor things? And then what are you gonna force someone to bring back to the board?
Right, yeah, right.
I suggest we adjourn and look at this again in a month.
Right.
Come back to it in a month, another great example. Come back to it next year.
Yeah.
And
But appreciate your feedback. Again, we're gonna keep working to try to make this what this body wants it to be, and we hope, at least even at this stage, you can see, hope we're showing that this will have some benefits as you do your work.
we've never done this before. So this is,
Great idea.
pretty monumental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, are we done? Are you done? Is that it, Glenn?
That's it.
We're all finished.
Thank you.
Any other business, Mike?
No,
So what happened to the medical office building that's supposed to go where the, are they still fiddling around, or what's going on there?
no, I think they didn't, get their tenants, is what we heard. Should we,
Yeah, so there's, happy to talk with you more about it afterwards, but essentially, they were counting on a major, one of a few major clinical chains, any of them really, to commit as an anchor tenant, and that didn't materialize in the time they had the property under contract. Now, if that happened in the future, is it hard to restart that contract? No, not necessarily, but, they don't have a contractual right to the property at this time.
Okay.
should we make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So seconded.
Everybody say yes.
Yes.
We're done.
Yes, you spoke for all of us.
Okay, you take